Hello, hello. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm great. A little frazzled, but I'm okay. Like, too much going on at once. My daughter wanted to make sure that I shared everybody this picture that she drew me, that she said that so everybody can see that. Ava, she loves me.
Beautiful, Ava. Beautiful.
Yes, beautiful. So it's been like a crazy weekend. Scott got his second Pfizer shot on Friday, so he was like out of commission on the weekend. He didn't have it as bad as me, thankfully, but he was tired, like a lot of exhaustion, and I was like, yeah, I feel that. So yeah, that's that. Other than that, we did nothing over the weekend. We did nothing. It was I'm trying to think. No, I didn't do anything. We didn't do anything. It was kind of nice. I did laundry, like I always do.
It's time.
Like I always do. What about you?
I went to a birthday party. I did lunch with a former coworker. I got the hot tea at my job. I am so out of the loop at my job nowadays. I used to get all the hot tea at my job. Now I get nothing.
Gotta get the goods.
Ooh, scandalous at my job. They're scandalous at my job. But that's okay.
Are they?
I'm going to stay home. I'm going to stay home and I'm going to stay out of it.
That's usually the best thing to do, is to stay out of everything.
Yes.
Stay out of it all. Yeah.
Yes.
What I do yesterday, I re-listened to the entire podcast so I could talk about it today. Yeah.
And I was like, I should do that today, but I was like,
dude,
no.
This is going to be
just
crazy.
Sent me down a whole rabbit hole. I tell you what.
So before we start the discussion, just out of curiosity, so how do you feel after finishing it? Because I know that, like, was it last week that I was kind of like, I feel a little out of it, and it's like part of it was because I was listening to it, and I think I had gotten to like I was on episode 5 or something, and I guess I just kind of was taking it. Like, I think I was in like deep contemplation of it, but I wasn't sure. And I was like, I don't know if I feel good or bad. But after I finished listening to it, those thoughts kind of went away. And I just have been left with like a million thoughts about like 12 different things. And it's not bad. It's just like, I'm just like, wow, this is fascinating stuff here. So how did you feel after watching it, after listening to it overall?
I felt like I learned so much about something that I knew nothing about. Yes. And so I was so excited to learn something about something that I knew nothing about. Something I would have never had any other interest in otherwise. Right. And I was just like interested. It was just like something, it was like opened my mind to something, just all new things to think about and whatnot. So to that end, like, I felt like this is absolutely fascinating. And then I just like, I was so impressed with the podcast. I was so impressed with how much care was put into it, how much the producers cared about this topic and the subject matter and the people that they talked about and the people that they talked to, and how this even just affected them, themselves individually. I was just really impressed overall with just how it was put together. And
it was well done. It was
very well done.
So let's jump in from the beginning. So if anybody who's going to watch this or is getting here, let's just start from the beginning. So we're going to be talking about the L is for liberation this week. And we talk about it in the sense of like a spiritual liberation, because...
Am I a mod on your channel?
Am I what?
Am I a moderator on your YouTube channel?
No. Do you need to be?
Yeah, and I can just throw the link.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me do that. Hold on. So we are, we are talking about this podcast that I happened to just like throw...
Coffin Queen.
Throw in the conversation last week. Was it last week? It was last week. Yeah, I threw in the conversation last week.
And I think the week
and it just kind of, it sounded interesting. And I said, Angie, try this. You might like it. And, it turned out that she did. And I'm so happy. Okay, moderator.
It sounded interesting. And I
Sorry.
Is it Brown Girl Life? Is it Brown Girl Life?
Yeah.
Okay.
Brown Girl is one word.
Okay, so it's life. I can't. Why am I not finding you? Why can't I find you? Is it supposed to be at? How does that work? Oh, a URL. You got to give me the URL. Jesus Christ. So it kind of became something that I was like so happy that you wanted to watch it, like wanted to talk about, listen to it, and then you liked it because I was like, oh my God, we have to talk about this because this is ridiculous. So Astray is a podcast that is by, here you are. Let me just get your URL. Astray is a podcast that is done by Carolyn Slaughter. And it is about what people will do to get what's the word I'm looking for here? To reach enlightenment.
Seeking enlightenment. Yeah, seeking enlightenment.
And it's focusing primarily. I'm sorry, guys, that I'm doing this all like right now.
I apologize. I did it. I caused it.
Your fault.
My fault.
Hopefully this will work. It's not coming. Why is it not letting me? It says no matching users. What is going on?
What? Oh well. Scott, all right. Scott can drop the link.
All right.
You can drop the link.
It's on Spotify. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out for you tonight. I promise.
Yeah,
afterwards, I'll add it so you can do that for me. All right. I'm sorry, guys. So it's focusing primarily on. Hey, Coffin Queen. It's focusing primarily on the story of 3 individuals, 2 who have gone missing and presumed dead, and 1 2 who have gone missing, presumed dead, and 1 who has actually contacted her while the story was going on. They were recording it in real time, and he called and contacted her and was like, this sounds a lot like what I was going through. And his story, this man, Charlie Marinelli, he kind of, gave a lot of, I don't want to say closure, but he kind of filled in a lot of gaps as to what could possibly be happening. But before we even get to that, let's start at the beginning, because I think that, thanks, Scott, I think that what it is and the conversations that this podcast brings up, to me, it brought up several things. And let's start from the beginning. She talked about this in the first episode only, but I think it's important to bring up. So she opens the podcast, mentioning that she herself is a seeker. And then she talks about the writer/journalist Scott Carney. Now, I had never heard of Scott Carney prior to this podcast. But he opens the podcast relating a story of how he didn't really add a lot of detail. I'm going to probably give a lot of detail because I actually watched his TED Talk about this, so I kind of know a little bit more. And I'm reading one of his. This is how bad it is. I'm reading his book, one of his books. So he had been a PhD student, and he was bouncing around East Asia. He was in Tibet, Nepal, India. Was kind of doing his own kind of path, seeking something. And I guess he just wasn't finding what he was looking for or hadn't figured it out yet. And he ended up back in the United States, where he started working for this company that took students on these tours of different countries. And this one he was going to be to India. And it was advertised as something like going to see a lot of the major holy sites there. So they ended up after I want to say about maybe 10 days into the trip or so, they ended up in the town, and I'm not going to remember the name of it because
I think they were in Delhi, weren't they?
Well, they started in Delhi, and then they ended up in Bhatka, where the Buddha had attained enlightenment. That city. So I think it's Bhatka is how you pronounce. I have to check me on that. But so there's this city there where the Buddha supposedly sat under a fig tree and got enlightened. And this is a pilgrimage. It's a very sacred, holy place. And they were there. And part of their trip was they were going into a multi-day meditation at the end. So, he was talking about this one student. He called her Emily, she was very into yoga, very into the new agey spiritualism. And, it sounded like she was from Virginia, which was like Southern Belle from Virginia. He said like, that's what it was like. That's how he described her, a Southern Belle. And during this retreat, he asked her how she found it. And she said it was like absolutely life-changing. And it was one of the greatest things she's ever experienced. And one of the evenings he had noticed that a bunch of the students were hanging out and she was in the corner, like furiously writing in her journal. And then at 3:00 in the morning later that night, when after everyone's going to sleep, one of the students was walking back to his room and he found her dead on the ground. She had went back to her room, covered her face in a certain type of scarf, and then jumped off of the top of the building to her death. And he was charged.
Two things that I think are important is one, when we need to circle back and explain what a seeker is, and two, that it was a 10-day silent meditation.
Right. Yes,
which
I was wanting
is very important to.
And we're going to talk about that. I think this is going to go in a logical order. I promise. In my head, it's working. So he was tasked with bringing her body back to the United States because he's the adult in charge here. So in the course of the investigation that he had to go through to do this, he had gotten a hold of her journal and he had noticed, and he started reading it, and he had noticed at the end, in the last few pages before her death, she was writing about how she was having visions and that she saw that she was like this, becoming this enlightened being. And she thought, contemplating on her death was like an amazing thing. And at the end, she said she was a bodhisattva, which is a holy person, almost like a god. I think you can compare them. I think the comparable analogy would be like an angel in Christianity or Catholicism. And she believed that she was a bodhisattva. Now, in the religion, a bodhisattva is is somebody who they can choose. They're like reaching enlightenment, and they can choose to either go towards enlightened nirvana and leave this earth, or they can make the choice to stay on this earth and help everybody else become enlightened beings. So every living thing on the planet, they would help reach enlightenment. And this choice, I guess, she made was to die and go to nirvana, I guess, is what she chose. And this situation so moved him profoundly that this man basically spent the rest of his journalism and writing career talking about these seeking enlightenment and these seekers. And he's written 4 books about this and a number of articles. So that's kind of the setup for the podcast. And I'm not sure if I'd love to ask Carolyn if that was something that she had read about or saw and that was like prompted this, or was it just her and her interest in seeking? But that's kind of like the setup for the podcast. And when we talk about a seeker, we're talking about somebody who is looking for some kind of spiritual connection, like spiritual understanding, something that's missing, I guess, in their lives or their minds of, in their being of in this universe, that they're looking to feel connected in a certain way or to understand something. I guess the best way we can describe it is they're searching for enlightenment in whatever form that may be. So go ahead.
My understanding of a seeker, from because I didn't listen to it, I might have to go back again. But my understanding is that a seeker is also somebody specifically from the West. It's also somebody moving away from Western religion.
No, because I don't really know if they made the distinction or not. And if they did, I missed it even on the second round. But for the sake of this podcast and for what I think that seeker very much is denoting somebody from a Western culture who is going to the East to find some kind of spiritual enlightenment. They are, I don't want to say obsessed, but they are very interested in Eastern religions and the beliefs there and the culture there. So they go there specifically for that. And it's specifically people who are not from these countries that they talk about. And they actually, they called it India syndrome at one point, and now it's kind of seeker syndrome. There are other places that this happens. They had mentioned that they've seen this happen in Jerusalem. In Florence, Italy, this happens because of the beauty of the country. And then oddly enough, there was one that was in France called Eiffel Tower, which is so weird to me that they said that this is mostly by Japanese tourists
Japanese people. That's right.
Go to France and are completely let down by the experience. I don't know why. There's kind of two things right off the bat after listening to Scott's story and then I started his book, and then in the course of this podcast that I kept coming back to. And that one of them was that there is a definite danger in you can be too meditative, right? So that came up several places in the podcast, that a lot of this is coming from, people who are people who have been sitting in meditation for quite some time with their own thoughts or not thoughts, contemplating. And there's a danger in that, because it can bring up mental and emotional trauma that you cannot deal with, right? That comes up later on in the podcast.
Is it too meditative, or is it that certain people aren't prepared for it, or is it that people aren't prepared for it and they're not supported correctly? Because like at the point where they were talking about the Beatles and John Lennon got to that point and then left, where he had stayed and he would have been supported through that process, he would have gotten to the other side. But like you're saying, that the whole point is that there are inherent dangers to meditation, and it is not ever presented that way.
No, and I think it's all of those things. It can be any one of those things, because we see in the podcast with the mentioning of the example of the Beatles going to see the Maharishi, and they being in like this meditative state for the 30 days or so they were there or whatever. And then like John, like there was a lot of controversy about why they left, but they were talking to somebody who's actually there, the son of the woman who was the PR person for the ashram in the Maharishi. So he was there specifically. He was the one that the song Bungalow Bill was written after. And they talk about their experience of how like they left and it was kind of like a little controversial, and John Lennon left and he had, it was kind of understood that he had hit some kind of personal, emotional kind of issues that were very difficult for him to deal with. And then they left. And then basically, he was like, well, he had the worst year ever after that. Like he started having drug issues. He got divorced his wife, like all this stuff kept happening because he wasn't prepared to deal with it. And he did not have somebody who could guide him through the process of what's coming up. He mentions, Prudence, I guess, what's her face's sister, right? So it was, Mia Farrow, Prudence Farrow, who's her sister was there, and that's who Dear Prudence was written about, because she apparently spent like 10 hours a day in her room meditating, trying to find enlightenment, and apparently she had a mental illness that supposedly this helped her very much. So there's that kind of like not having the support, but I also think it's not knowing what is going to come up from this, or not knowing going in that there's the potential for this, because as Caroline speaks to certain people who have gone through this spiritual journey and have come out on another side of it, whether they're happy and fine or they've had issues, they talk about the amount of work that has to go into this. It's not something that you can do in a weekend retreat or 10 days in meditation. This is like a lifetime of work that has to happen. And that kind of brings me to the second point that stands out to me, which is this Western understanding or misunderstanding of spiritualism and enlightenment of the East and going with these expectations that X, Y, and Z are going to happen, and then they're not happening, or they're not happening the way they want, or there's a sense of appropriation of that culture by Westerners, and they're not, I don't want to say like I'm lacking the right practicing correctly, or do not understand what they are undertaking when they do this, right? So that's a huge thing, because there's like, there was a point in the podcast where they were floating around the idea that, perhaps part of this psychosis that people have had is because they get to India and they have no understanding of what's going to meet them once they walk out of the airport, that it's like this complete assault on your senses and your mental, like you're just kind of like knocked over by sounds, smells, like at sight, everything's like busy, millions of people everywhere. And it's like completely not what somebody's expecting when they walk. And if you've had no exposure to what India's like, this can be very overwhelming for people. And that seems to be like, everybody keeps commenting it's like an assault on your senses, it's like overstimulating of your senses. So I think that, to me, those are kind of like two major themes that run through this. And the way that I really appreciate the way that it's presented. And like Scott talks about in his books, it's like the same thing. Like, is this path for enlightenment and searching and spending so much time in your brain, contemplative, without the right kind of guidance, is that healthy? Like, where does this lead to people to? And the podcast kind of tries to explain like what happens to these people. I had no idea this was a thing. Like none. I'd never heard of this before. I'd never heard of these missing cases. And it's supposed. So the other part I want to say was Scott found after this, he had gotten a hold of 6 journals of people who had committed suicide or had some kind of untimely end. And it was all the similar kind of thing. So he had written this first book based on what he's read in these journals. And that's kind of what set him on this path of like, is seeking enlightenment actually really dangerous? If you don't really, to the untrained person, I guess, or to somebody who doesn't fully understand what they're getting into. Yeah. I mean,
well,
go ahead.
I mean, I think there's a lot to that. I think that, yes, I think it's dangerous. I do think it's dangerous because it involves deep self-reflection, and anything that involves deep self-reflection, when you have trauma, when you have deep self-trauma, inner trauma, whatever, and you're not prepared to face that or process that, 10 days of silent meditation is going to bring that up. Like,
culture shock,
and you have culture shock, and you don't have a professional or anybody with you to guide you through that, and you start, I don't know, like, and I think that as Westerners who are used to going to church on Sunday, it's easy to think that you're going to go spend 10 days or 30 days in India and come out this changed, enlightened being. And enlightenment in and of itself, like, that's like a whole lifelong thing. Like, that's something completely different. And like when they brought, I'm so bad, I can't remember her name, but the lady, the vegetarian lady.
Sedvici.
Yeah.
Sedvici. I kept thinking her name would sound like ceviche, but it's Sedvici.
Sedvici. Like she was like prepared to dedicate her entire life. And she was fortunate to find an ashram with a reputable, responsible person who worked with her for the rest of her life. Like, there was no appropriation involved in Sedvici, who was somebody who she just went to India for vacation because she was a staunch vegetarian, and it was easier for her to find meal options. And she had a random experience. She wasn't looking for an experience. No. She just went to dip her toes in the Ganges River and was overcome, and something inside of her said, you can't leave. This is home for you. And that was what set her on her path. It wasn't that she went there seeking something. She was not a seeker. No. She was sought. And that's what makes her experience different.
She's also a scientist. So when you watch her TED Talk, she'll talk a little bit more about this. But
she was still a scientist.
She's a scientist. She's got a doctorate or was working on a doctorate in psychology. So she took a very scientific approach to this because she was like the first person to be like, I'm absolutely not having a spiritual moment right now. Right. She's like, I don't believe in this. And it turned out that she did. And she's been there for 20 years. I mean, what are you going to say? You can't say anything to that. To me, that's somebody who's devoted their life to a mission and to a teaching and to their beliefs. And she does a lot of humanitarian work in India. So, but she definitely seems to me to be the exception to the rule of what happens there. So another part that I think that is tied up in this, that I think the podcast does spend quite some time talking about, and you just mentioned, is you really have to make sure that you're finding the right teacher. Like to find the guru or your teacher is almost like its own seeking adventure, right? To find somebody who's going to actually, nurture and mentor you correctly and through this process, because it sounds like to me from listening to the 3 different stories that were given that all 3 of these people fell in with people who were not very, who were not to be trusted, who had ulterior motives, who had bad intention. And it's interesting.
And that just makes me wonder, about people who really do need to check their motives. Like, are you really just seeking an experience for yourself? And you just want to be able to say that you wandered the Himalayas with a holy man of India, versus are you truly seeking enlightenment? And I feel like part of me feels like a real piece of crap for saying that, because real people have gone missing and will probably never be found. And I have my own little theory, and I'm sure you probably agree with my theory for why they'll probably never be found.
Right.
And real people have died.
But I mean, like that one person's parents so staunchly are like, he was not there looking for a spiritual enlightenment. Like they truly believe that. And I'm not sure I believe that either, because he just seemed like he just seemed like an adrenaline junkie, like somebody who really gets off on being like survivalist and doing like, went to the Himalayas, I went to Tibet, I did, and this was just like another adventure for him to do. So, it didn't seem to me like he was on a path for anything spiritual, but, I think what happens is that somewhere along the way, they run into these sadhus or these babas who kind of make them think that they might be having some kind of spiritual or enlightened moment. And then they are put on this path that is being guided by someone who could not be trusted and does not have their best intentions at heart. And that's brought up many times in the podcast. I just want to make sure that was it Jonathan Spallin who was the one who was the hold on, let me just say.
He was the one that they found his boots by the waterfall, right?
Yeah, I think so. So there was Jonathan Spallin was one. He was the one who was missing from Ireland. And he talked about how
Australian gentlemen.
Yes, his mother was saying he talked about how he was hitting 29 and felt it was the right moment to take some time out of his own pace. We even coined a term for it, whimming, in that he could decide he was going to change his mind on a whim. So this was the last time Spallin's mother, Linda, spoke to her son was on February 3rd. He called to say he was setting off on a trek into a wooded area outside of Rishikesh. He said cell service would be spotty, but promised to text whenever he could. And then she asked him if he was taking a guide, but he said he would do it alone. He was upbeat and told me not to worry. I said I would prefer if he had a guide, and he replied, no, I want to do it on my own. It's a spiritual thing. And
that's why they called.
That's when he went missing. Right. And then they haven't found him. This is the part they haven't found him. They said this was what date is this? Just so I double check this really quickly. This is from 2012, this article. So in March of 2012, that's when they found his items by the riverside. They discovered his passport, clothes, and cash, sleeping roll next to a waterfall in Rishikesh's Laxman Jula district. So this is the person that he just decided. This wasn't the Jonathan Spallin wasn't the adventure junkie. It was the other guy who was the adventure junkie.
And he was the one that they saw him. The other guy was the first guy, Ryan.
Right. Ryan was the one who was
walked off into the Himalayas with the guy.
Yes. And he was the one who was like the adventure, kind of like had gone on several adventures prior. So thank you for remembering his name, Ryan. So Jonathan's the one that I'm terrible.
And then there was a third guy from Australia, and they found him on the dead body register.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So with Jonathan Spallin, they say that either there was foul play of some kind, or he decided to just like renounce and walk into an ashram someplace and never to be heard from again, which apparently, if you talk to the Indian officials, this is something that happens often, which maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I personally think that he just got in with somebody the wrong way, probably got taken advantage of and was probably murdered. That's my personal thinking. But this is like commonplace, apparently. I almost liken this to like the new age self-help spiritualism that we have going on in this country, like with the Tony Robinsons and them, that they sell this idea, right? But and people buy it, and their intention is to make money. Let's be honest. This is not. They don't care about people. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody. I do not think Tony Robbins cares about you. I'm sorry. I think he cares about your wallet. But so it's almost a similar thing where you have these. That there is this influx of Westerners who are going to keep coming to this country looking for something. So it's almost like you've now set up this economic society here where you can take advantage of people who are coming in, and these babas and sadhus who, I think even somebody said, just because they wear orange or white robes doesn't mean that they're, a guru. They're not good people. They don't have to be good people. And always remember that the guru themselves is still on a spiritual journey of their own, and they can be compromised. And
even the most powerful gurus, even the most with the most temples, like they featured the one that went to prison for raping the young girl, and he had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers. So
but he was God. Yeah. I mean, so not, but there's an entire like economic system devoted to this, and they say that they are, they're there for money. They want, they take advantage of that. So there's also like that piece of it, which I don't think many Westerners get when they go there. And
because they have this idea that this is just a spiritual mecca, and not
everybody has good intentions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I really believe that, like, when you are seeking this spiritual enlightenment in this holy city like Rishikesh, and you're on the banks of the Ganga River, like, you know what I mean? And this is the holiest place, and yes, actually, because these are still just people.
Yeah.
And they're some of the poorest people. So
yeah. Okay.
Hey, Big Boss.
Hey, Big Boss. Ryan Chambers was the Australian man who disappeared in 2005. And apparently, so it said in 2005, a young Australian man named Ryan Chambers disappeared barefoot and shirtless, leaving behind all his worldly possessions and a note that read, "If I'm gone, don't worry, I'm not dead. I'm freeing minds, but first I have to free my own." And this is a guy who like spent time in caves in Tibet. Like he was just like an extreme seeking adventure kind of guy. So this, they don't know, like they can't, his family doesn't know if he was looking for something spiritual or not. They are not, none of these families are really sure what the deal is with what they're looking for when they go missing.
But Ryan went off into the Himalayas with a holy man.
Yes, he did. He had hooked up with a Baba who was going to accompany him on this. I forgot, they were going to some city, another city where the I think it was where the Dalai Lama retreats to, and they when they found out that they couldn't find him and he went missing, they went and actually found this Baba in a completely different city, mind you. They never arrived at the city. And the Baba told them that, that he's Ryan's crazy, like he's nuts. And they got, they in making it seem like they had a fight or something and parted ways, and he has no idea what happened. But it's her, but they arrested him, and because his story was terrible, right? And he ended up committing suicide, right? But I mean, that is one of the story arcs in this podcast. And, I think when you listen to it, you're kind of going to come to the same conclusion that, yeah, this guy probably killed him or had somebody kill him or did something and, or poisoned him or something like, right. And it's frightening. And there are several times in the podcast where people that they've consulted with say, I would never go off with anyone that I didn't vet before go. Like, I mean, this was, they were saying, I would never trust a Baba country. No. And women, especially, like one of the women who was talking was like, I would never, even as a woman, I would never go off with a holy man, Baba, Sadhu, whoever by my side. I would not meet with them. I still do not meet with them. It is not something I do. Because, and it's right. It's almost frightening to think that there's this level of distrust, but at the same time, these are supposed to be people who are supposed to be taking you on this spiritually enlightening journey. And then you can compare it to priests and the sex scandals that happen there, because it's the same thing, right? You put your trust into these people. You feel like they're religious. They have good intentions. And this is what happens when you don't do your work, like your homework behind. I mean, I would never in a foreign country go off with somebody I did not know. Like that is just not, that would never happen. So who knows what kind of stories or what these people are telling these individuals while they have them as a captive audience that would convince them to go with them, right? And then you throw in another level of this where it seems to be there's a lot of drug use involved in a lot of this as well. Yes. They talk about chillum, which is like tobacco and hash or marijuana. And there's a lot of hash smoking there as well. So it's really like, it's not, people don't seem to be making decisions with clear heads or, and then at the end of the podcast, we talk about another drug, Datura, which seems to be like the worst trip ever and causes like psychosis. And this person is, absolutely believes that they were under the influence of that. And they also found LSD in his system, which he has no idea how he got there. Right. So, that's a lot to think about. Like when you're drinking these, when you're being offered tea, when you're being offered food. I mean, there's several moments in the podcast where people tell you, do not take food off the road from strangers. Do not drink things that people give them. Do not. And it's like, God, like, you can't trust anything right there. And it's like, it makes me wonder, is it because of the fact that there are, like, for lack of a better word, these white Western people coming and that this is how you take advantage of them? Or are you doing this to your own, like, countrymen, like people who, people, your neighbor down the street? Like, is this how you treat people? Or is this like are these things that are happening because they're convenient and this is the opportunity to do this? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like there's an entire opportunistic experience set up here for people to be taken advantage of.
I don't remember whose parents said that they talked to some Westerners who lived there, and the word out in the street is that that's where Westerners go to die.
Yeah.
And that can't be confirmed or denied, but like, when Western people disappear and they have a database of bodies
see, that's the other thing. Now, whose body was found on that database?
It was an Australian. It was a person of Sri Lankan descent who grew up in Australia.
Right.
And they happened. That was why they found his body in that database, because he was brown skinned.
So apparently there is a database that India keeps that's basically called Dead Bodies in India, which is frightening. And I won't look at it. I did not look at it
either. I'm not.
Because it doesn't sound good to me at all. And from the description that they give in the podcast, it's not pretty. What? They're going to find these people on Mars, right? Probably.
Or just in the next universe over, in the next dimension over, because quantum physics is real.
So it sounds to me like what they do is bodies that they find, whether they find them in forests, cities, wherever, or for them, it sounds to me like the majority of them come up off the Ganges River.
Yeah.
And they photograph them, or if they don't have photographs, they just put descriptions up and you can claim them. The police department does this so that people can find missing persons. And this person's family, I don't know who tipped them off to this. They never mentioned how they found it or how they came across this website, but they found their brother's body on this website. And they're convinced that the only reason that they even ended up there was because they're Sri Lankan and dark-skinned, and that they will not put anyone white or who looks Western, like the Caucasian, on that site because they don't want people to know how many unidentified people go missing or end up dead in India. And, they could not confirm or deny this because no one called them from the Indian consulate. Like, no one's going to talk about this. Right. And that's the other running thing underneath all of this also, is that these poor families who are trying to find their kids or their brothers or their loved ones, trying to deal with the Indian government is like, talk about a corrupt system. Even their own, but we like to talk about how corrupt our government is, but Mike, seriously, when to me, it's interesting, the tie of religion and government and how tightly wound they are together is interesting and scary at times. And I'm just going to say this, they don't like any interaction that they've documented with the consulate or with police officers or with, any kind of government officials in this podcast do not sound like they do not make it sound like they that this is not a common problem that happens in India. This is
like the guy at the end, when he was talking about the lady that came to his room, and he called the U.S. Embassy, and those cops came, and then they came for him, the same police officers. So it's almost like, do they have like a specific squad to deal with Westerners in psychosis in Rishikesh?
We're talking about Charlie Martinelli, who is somebody who, after listening
to... I don't remember his name.
Okay. After listening to Ryan Chambers and Jonathan Spallin's stories on the podcast, like I said, it was filmed in real time. He contacted Carolyn and said, this story sounds so familiar. I feel like you're talking about my own. So he talks about, he went to India after his grandfather died. And so it sounds to me like he was in mourning still, grieving, had not processed a lot, and went to India to kind of go away from his family. He said to go away from his family, think things through kind of situation. Had no,
Can I just say
yeah.
that the way that they told the story, it was in 2 parts, and it literally had me on the edge of my
it's
seat.
riveting. It's riveting.
Both times. It was just, the whole podcast was riveting. But
it's a parent's worst nightmare too.
Yes.
I mean, because all I kept thinking about was, oh my God, what would I be doing right now if this was me? So let's just jump into this. We're gonna spoil the hell out of this. I'm sorry, guys, but definitely go listen to it because it's amazing.
We're not even doing it.
We're not even doing any justice to this.
We're just giving you things to think about while you listen.
He bought a one-way ticket to India, landed in Delhi, and the only thing he had planned was he booked a hostel in Delhi so that he could sleep off his jet lag. And then he decided to go to I don't remember the names of these cities. He went to a city that's supposed to be a very holy, very like into the spiritualism, kind of like a very popular vacation kind of spot, it sounds like, because there's lots of cafes and lots of meditation places and lots of massage, like, they cater to that. Mm-hmm. And he was kind of staying there. Sounded like he was renting a room from some people, and was kind of just like was hanging out with the locals and doing his thing and kind of trying to find himself. And he said himself he wasn't looking for a teacher, and he ended up finding one. He met this Baba. And he basically says how he spent a lot of let's back up a little bit because it's kind of interesting. So one day in the cafe, this woman walks in who's basically having a psychotic break. That is what it is. Let's be honest. Mm-hmm. She wasn't speaking. She couldn't move. She was having a hard time communicating. She was out of it. And because he was American and she was American, they kind of asked him to go look. The cafe owners knew him, and they were like, could you kind of like go look and see what's going on with this woman? And he talked to her, and he got very little out of her. He found out that she was on like a dry fast for like the last 2 days. No water, no shower. After a 10-day meditation, right? Again.
Here we go.
And he allowed her to go to his room, shower, I guess, try to sleep off whatever was having, and it just didn't work. And so he ended up calling, he called the consulate, right?
American Embassy or whatever,
He called the embassy, and they came and got her, and I'm assuming took her to a hospital because she was just out of it completely.
They sent the police. They sent the police.
They sent the American Embassy set up a pair of police officers who.
And he could never even get her name out of her.
He didn't know anything about her. So she couldn't find her wallet. That was one of the things. So she couldn't pay for her hotel.
She couldn't pay her. And they took her passport because
they took her passport. Right. So she's got no identification. She can't communicate, and she's going. And he never found out what happened to her because she had no idea. He had no idea who she was. But he's like, make note that these police officers came. We talked to them, and they knew who I handled it. So he readily admits that he smoked a lot of chillum while he was there. He, partook. He sounded like he was just kind of enjoying being like a local there. And he met this Baba who was like, oh, look, we have an opportunity here. I mean, and he must have been taking a lot of chillum because he really believed that they were telekinetically talking to each other, telepathically speaking to one another, that this man was sent to him for a reason, and that he was here to teach him and put him on the spiritual path. And he just, I guess, decided to become a devotee of him. And so the way that we find all of this out is that his mom, he hadn't heard from him in a while, and they finally got him on the phone, and he told on a FaceTime call, right? Was it a FaceTime? Mm-hmm. No, it was first with a phone call. And he said, I have to, I'm sorry, like I'm going to be in like study, and I'm not going to be able to talk to you very, very often. And she's like, well, like how long often? He's like, I don't know, a couple of years. And she was like, what? Excuse me, a couple of years? But oh, it was a FaceTime call because she was like, he looked completely not like himself. He kept looking like he was talking. Someone else was in the room. He was gaunt. He looked like he was starving to death. Like he just did not look like him. And I don't know if it was like a brother or the sister's boyfriend or someone walked in and was like, he's on drugs. Like they were like, there's something seriously wrong with him. And he has the part that's killed. This is the part that kills me though. Okay. Can we just take a little side, put a pin in that for a second? He's got a fiance that's in Hawaii, right? And supposedly she's in communication with him. And she's not calling his parents going, oh my God, have you talked to your son because he's scaring the living crap out of me?
Because he called her and said he was scared. He
called her. So he called her like after this phone call, FaceTime with the parents, because so they had another one and he's telling his mother, again, looks crazy. Like he's in a cafe, he's got a shawl on his head, earrings, looks nuts, more thin, and telling his mom, go charter a plane and go to Hawaii.
Go to Hawaii.
And she's like, why? Like, are you guys going to get married? Like, no, mom, don't worry about it. Just go. And, don't worry about it. You can quit your job. Like, it's going to be fun. Like, just completely erratic. She has no idea. And, thankfully she's keeping him on the call. So he's talking about this. She brings in like other people to like witness this. And then, like, it turns out that he had talked to his fiance, like, prior to this, like a day or two, and told her that he was afraid that something bad was happening, like he was being drugged or something was going on. And this chick never called anybody. Like, that's the part that kills me. Like, wouldn't you be on the phone? I'd be hysterical if my fiance called me and was like, I'm in another country. I don't know what's happening to me. He looked like that as I've never seen. And I'd be like, oh my God, he's gonna, like, something bad is happening. And she does, there's no indication whatsoever that this girl had any contact with his family other than after when the mom called. And his parents are divorced. And he had a similar phone call with the father where he said, I think, and his father was like, you need to get out of here. So while he's on this FaceTime call with his mom saying all of this, he starts walking away into the woods or whatever, barefoot. And she's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm trying to take a bus. And she's just like freaking out. So they managed to get a hold of somebody he was friends with there that they combed his social media and found somebody who was friends with him. And they managed to get a hold of this guy and said, please go find him, go get him. Just get eyes on him, take him to a hospital. So the guy goes, and then meanwhile they call the consulate, they call the embassy, and they're like, this is a situation. My son seems to looks like he's having some kind of psychotic break, or he's drugged, something bad's happening, he's in a lot of trouble, what do we do? And the first thing they say is like, get on a plane to India. Now can I just say that, like, as a parent, get on a plane to India, like, to me, you might as well tell me go walk there at that, because, like, they were fortunate that they could get on a plane and go to India right away, because this is like a $3,000 plane ticket, right? Like, I mean, this is not cheap. It's a 17-hour plane. Right. Well, that too, right? Like, so they had passports. They were able to get the visa really quickly. I guess the embassy did something for them, but they get there and they're still like in the process of getting to India or getting there. Like, they're still in contact in Turkey. They're still in contact with the friend who's got him. They're like, please take him to a hospital. Please take him to a hospital. Please take him. And he's like, he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go. And every time this guy turns his back, he like disappears someplace. So they, so it's like, it's really like this cat and mouse game of like, where is Charlie? Where's Charlie? You're going to get Charlie. And this poor woman is like freaking out. Like, as a parent, I'd be freaking out too. I'd be like, grab my fucking kid, put him someplace and hold him there until I get there. Right? If you're not going to take him to a hospital, put him someplace where we can get to him, that he's not going to go somewhere. So eventually they get him back. So they call the cops, or they call the embassy. Oh, the embassy, after they called them, sent police officers. So they just happened to send the same police officers that were there when he had this woman. So they knew him. Therefore, I guess they treated him possibly differently than they would. He
recognized the police officers.
Yes, and they recognized him.
Right.
So they get him in the back of the police car and they try to take him to the hospital. The first hospital won't take him. Second hospital won't take him. They finally get to a third hospital. He won't go. Now, while this is all happening, He's FaceTiming his mom. He's out of his mind. He thinks he's like Jesus or something because he's like he burned cash in his hands. He thinks they're taking him to the hospital to cure the sick people there, because apparently in between all of this mess, he's been performing rituals, walking around in the mountains, going to people's private, like small little like temples and performing weird ceremonies that he has no idea like what he's doing. Sounds like he's exorcising people, he's seeing demons on people's face. Like he's completely out of it, like doesn't know reality from what he's seeing.
And some people are letting him do these, and some people are literally kicking his ass.
Yeah, so either, because it's like literally like the scary person on the street corner screaming at you kind of scenario. So either they're, the people who knew him were kind of like, all right, whatever. And then other people were just like, kill, like he got into so many fights because he was like literally approaching people and saying, oh my God, like you have a demon, you're possessed. Like, I mean, this is what he was doing. And so he remembers they finally, like at the third hospital, they like grabbed his ass, got him on a gurney, and I guess like sedated the shit out of him to get him under control. And the next thing he remembers is waking up in a hospital in Delhi, and his parents are there. And that's when they found out that he had LSD in his system, which he never knew he was taking. They had to get him out of the country because apparently he could have been thrown in jail for that. So they get him on enough antipsychotic medication so that he can get on a plane and go back to the United States. And he just and it continues when he's there. He's at home staying with his mom, and he's convinced his mother's drugging him. He's just, he is suffering from panic attacks, anxiety, doesn't know. So finally, like after his family urges him, he checks himself into a hospital, like a psychiatric hospital. And they're telling him he's got a bipolar episode. It was brought on by things like, and he doesn't really believe this because he's just like, I've learned the fastest way to get out of a mental institution is to just go with whatever diagnosis they give you. And, he basically is saying like those last weeks in India are a complete blur to him. He has no idea what reality was versus what was psychosis. He was just in that much of a state to this day. He doesn't know. And he said it was so real. Like what he was seeing and what was going on was so real. He doesn't know. He does not know what was real and what wasn't. And in his case, it's especially troubling or problematic because he has been somebody who's gone on quests like this before, who's used psychedelic drugs to kind of find some higher spiritual power or insight. This is something he did. His parents knew he did it. They knew he smoked marijuana regularly. They knew he did psychedelic drugs to like kind of go to expand his mind. And now he's working with a therapist who's using psychedelic drugs to help him recover. So he's kind of he kind of goes down that path of like alternative medicine in a really kind of alternative way. Like he's using psychedelic drugs to treat, but whatever works, it sounds fine. But he doesn't know. And that's what's difficult for him because he cannot tell you what was real versus what wasn't during that entire time that he was there. And the last episode of this podcast has him calling Caroline saying, have you ever heard of Datura? And she's like, I have no idea what that is. And he's like, oh, we got to talk. So, I guess when the woman was having her breakdown that he witnessed, somebody who's been living in India for quite some time, who was an expat, said, that looks like she's having a reaction to Datura. She's high on Datura. And so what this is it's a plant in the nightshade family, I believe. It's basically poisonous.
Yes.
And it's everywhere, and apparently it's all over the place in India, and to the point where you're taught not to touch it, not to go near it, not don't ingest it, anything.
Right. Every part of the plant is poisonous.
Every part of the plant is poisonous. You can take it. You can
flowers
ingest it.
And the seeds are the most poisonous.
Most. You can ingest it. You can take it topically. I mean, it's very potent. And its effects apparently can last anywhere from 2 to 6 months to forever, basically. So it's something. It's an extraordinarily mind-altering substance, and it's been known to be used by Babas or other people who are wanting to push folks farther in their spiritual journey, or in this case, I would say to drug people in order to take advantage of them. But after he learned about the Datura, and he never really says how he kind of discussed, like, I don't know if it is something he researched himself or something happened that he found it. He said that everything that happened to him sounds like really comes in aligns with being drugged with by ingesting Datura over several weeks of it. And you know, who the hell knows, because you're drinking tea constantly, you're eating whatever they're like giving him. So and Caroline herself says, you know, by thinking about this kind of makes a lot of things make sense. If people are being drugged on the regular, that this is why folks end up missing or dead or I don't know what. But that's
or appear to commit suicide by walking into the
frightening.
Ganges. That's
fucking frightening. I'm sorry. Like so that's where the podcast ends. And so I'm under the impression that's it. There's only 9 episodes.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I want more. I have some questions. I want some questions answered.
It is so good.
But you know, so that's kind of like, so that's like the big outline of the podcast. But again, I come back to a couple of things. One, oh my God, what a way to portray India. I don't know about you, but after listening to this podcast, I will never go to that country. And I'm not, and
it's
I know
no different than Chicago, calling Chicago Chirac, you know?
I mean, like, geez, I mean, like, you know, so even Caroline's like, is this like common, like drugging people like this? And you know, they're like, no, but I mean, it's not unheard of. Like, you know, like it's always like not common, but could happen. We've heard about it because they're very open about the fact that they do a lot of drugs. They use a lot of drugs like chillum and bang. So there is that use. They try to make a parallel between using Datura and those who use ayahuasca and like go to South America on these ayahuasca tourism trips. But it sounds to me like the ayahuasca situation is much more kind of, I don't want to say regulated, but there's somebody who, there's like a plan of action and it's set up so that this is some kind of experience for somebody. At least the Coronado that they spoke to was very reputable in the sense of like, you know, this is what we do, this is the rules, this is what we set up for people, this is what it, but even he said it's been known that people slip Datura into the ayahuasca mix because they want to push people over the edge. Right. So that's creepy and scary as hell to think about. Then there's like, you know, I want to have a spiritual journey, but you know, I can't trust anybody who might want to take me.
You don't have to freaking go to India to have a spiritual journey, for crying out loud. Like, I don't know. I just don't know that necessarily everybody's spiritual journey has to happen in India. And
well, Doc, go ahead.
I just don't think that
Dr. Singh, who said at the end, she was like, any teacher I had always came to me, not vice versa. Right. I didn't go to them. They were shown to me. Right. And I thought that was interesting. In some things. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. And I think there's that to consider. And I don't think she was seeking a teacher either.
Well, like that's what the point is. She was never seeking. It happened. Right. It was a spiritual situation that came across her path. like now she's got her own story of how she's like had been like touched by spirit, that, you know, by enlightenment, the religious, and she's like how she started meditating, like it's her own thing. But the point that she was making was that you don't go out seeking that experience. If you're going to have that, it's going to come to you in some form that you'll recognize it when it happens. And that comes after you're doing a lot of work that, prepares you for it.
Right. But you got to do the work in yourself. And you can't even seek a Baba or what sadhu or whatever, like a priest, a psychiatrist or whatever. There's nobody that can do that work for you. You have to do that work within yourself. And I don't know. I wouldn't call it India syndrome. I think seeker syndrome is a much more appropriate term as well. I would certainly not indict India as a country, but I'm not eating anything out of the Ganges River for sure.
Man, there's a lot of little side tangents that this podcast goes off on. One of them is fascinating. It's about Agori, which is a whole other thing.
Yes.
Definitely look that up. Aghori. But they talk about the Ganges River a lot. And I know I'm gonna sound like the biggest basic white bitch, but oh my God. So they talk about the pollution. I knew that the Ganges was one of the most polluted rivers in the world. Mm-hmm. But the things that are normal that happen in the Ganges, I did not know. I knew that dead bodies were in there, but I didn't really get how many dead bodies were in there. So for those who don't know, Rishikesh and there was another city. They're very holy because they're on the banks of the Ganges River, and it's basically, it's kind of a blessing or good, to be buried near and have your ashes spread in the Ganges River. So it's charnel ground. So there's a lot of cremation happening on the riverbanks of the Ganges River. And if they're talking about how if your family can't afford to buy the wood for the pyre, they might just throw you in the river as a water burial. And it's
supposed to be illegal, but it's still
nobody
happening.
Listens to it. And they're describing it as dead body floating down the river, bird on the back eating something, kids swimming next to it, someone else washing clothes. I'm just I cannot. And then I don't know if it was in the podcast or if it was someplace else that I was reading, but literally somebody was talking about how they just wanted to dip their hands in the Ganges, and they made the mistake of just taking a sip of the water and ended up sick for 2 weeks. So it's really sad because this is the major waterway in the country. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of conservation efforts that are going on to try to clean it up. But it is I looked up the stats, and the fecal chloroform bloom in it is way off the fucking chart. It's probably at least 10 to 20, 30 fold higher than the next polluted river after it. So dang, I can understand seeing a lot of this and being overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. My thing was what it must smell like at the side of this river. I mean, maybe it doesn't. I can't imagine it not. And they're talking about living in these ashrams that are right on the banks of and I'm would you want to really live there? I mean, I don't know anything about India, so I'm just saying this as basic white bitch. And I should go look more of this up. But I mean, that's my kind of, if I would say criticism of the pot, it's to see the lens that India is almost kind of being portrayed through is a little fucking frightening. I have to say. Well,
I mean, it is one reality of India. There's many places to go in India that are stunningly beautiful as well.
It looks like it. I mean, from what I've seen, it looks like it's gorgeous, but apparently
if you looked at it, the first thing you ever saw of the United States was Chicago or some of the poorer places in Baltimore and Cincinnati and Los Angeles.
I mean, it's there's like a
people
billion
think the
people.
United States is the Wild West, and everybody's running around shooting each other up. So and that's not the case either.
That's the thing. It's a completely overpopulated country. It's huge. Mm-hmm. The population is enormous. It's bigger than China, not by much, but bigger. And you know, there's a lot of infrastructure outside of the cities that don't exist. And, you know, they make a point, you know, they talk about if you've never been to India and you don't know anything about it and you're sitting there watching cows walking around because cows are sacred and they're eating trash. And there's like, you know, a kid standing there, like, you know, picking through the trash and people live, you know, defecating on, I mean, it's an overwhelming thing for any Westerner probably to go and experience. Right. So adding that on top of having this expectation that you're going to have this extraordinarily beautiful, transcendent moment, enlightenment, spiritual journey, it's got to fuck with your head a little bit that, you know, if you've put a lot of your emotional investment into this, believing that something very positive is going to come to you when you're there and you go and it doesn't fulfill that experience, that can be devastating. Right. Now, pair that with spending 10 days in quiet meditation or spending that time being drugged or you know, like it's like the classic foreigner and a foreign person in a foreign country. Like you don't know, like, I mean, I can't imagine you know, how I would react in this situation because I can't imagine putting myself in this situation, but I'm not going to say that because I'm sure these people didn't believe they were going to put themselves in these kind of situations, but that they were smarter than putting themselves in. As a parent, I would be flipping the fuck out completely. And I have so much like, oh my God, for Charlie's parents, I was just like, this is like, I mean, and he straight out says, like, I'm lucky. Like, I'm a lucky person. Yeah. Like, I had somebody who could find me. My parents were able to get here, you know, and I mean, like, other people's parents showed up in India as well, but they didn't have like they didn't know people that knew their son.
They didn't have those perfect circumstances. No. The police knew him and the police cared enough, you know, like, they just happened to hit the police on a good day. Like, what if they didn't care and they were like, LSD? What if the doctors didn't care? You know, he just had the perfect set of circumstances. Because he could be in prison right now in India.
Yeah, he could be. I mean, it's just a lot. Like, I mean, it's brought up a lot of different thoughts to me. You know, I think the thing that keeps coming back, like I keep coming back to. So I'm listening. I'm waiting for Scott Carney's first book to arrive, which is the one that he wrote after he had this experience in his own experience in India, and it's called The Enlightenment Trap. This is the name of this book that he wrote. The Enlightenment Trap, Obsession. Wait, no, is that it? Obsession and Madness and Death on Diamond Mountain. Okay, nope, that's the one I'm listening to right now. Hold on. He's got several books, right? So he's got the one called The Red Market, On the Trail of the World's Organ Brokers, Bone Thieves, Blood Farmers, and Child Traffickers. So he's doing a lot of like weird stuff, following a lot of weird stuff. So I'm reading his current book right now. I'm reading this book. I'm reading, it's, I'm sorry, I'm like an idiot right now. I'll pull up the audio. I'm listening to the audio version of his book because, yeah, I'm listening to A Death on Diamond Mountain, which is pretty much the same situation that we're talking about with India. So A Death on Diamond Mountain is about similar circumstances that happened in Arizona. So let me just give you, because I've been listening to this book and the first couple of chapters are really interesting in the sense that they really talk about how Eastern religions kind of permeated the United States and Western culture, how they've kind of evolved over time, and possibly how and why people feel like they should go to these to the east and like have these journeys. And what I thought was interesting was, so like most cases that the Eastern religions came here through immigration. So when Chinese immigrated, but from what I have researched, in like 1893, there was a massive like a religious convocation where different religious groups got together, and this was like one of the first times that like Hinduism and Buddhism was even like acknowledged as religions. So after that, it became a little bit more accessible. And then, you know, of course, the 1960s, everybody was seeking enlightenment, and that became very popular. But something that he talked about was, and I never would have thought of, was that it even happened back to the point of the Revolutionary War, that because it was such a traumatizing event, and so many people saw so much death and so much awful, you know, the horrors of war, that when people came, like when Brits came over, like expatriates came over, and they had traveled to the East and had stories or had like experiences with other religions and described them, and maybe were practicing them, because people were kind of like so traumatized or so disillusioned by the amount of blood and death they saw in the American Revolutionary War. They might have been open to different religions' beliefs. And this was something that made people start practicing. Now, the interesting part was that, like all good Americans, when they started this, anything that they didn't know about the religion and they filled the gaps in with like their own Catholicism or Christian
their own American superiority.
So it's kind of like their own version of it. But then like when there was the mass of immigration to the United States, like from China, that's when more of the actual religion came. And you know, now, you know, there's plenty of peer-reviewed journals that show the positive aspects of meditation and all this. So like, this is something that, you know, people really believe is helpful, and, you know, is in everybody's, you know, everybody's aware of this, right? Everybody's aware of some aspects of Eastern religion. You know, it's a popular, there's like, you know, people practice popular religions, practice Buddhism and Hinduism are practiced in the United States. They're very popular. And, you know, but to the same point, there's this whole thing of like, you know, as far as the Eastern people go, they're just like, do we really understand the religion? And are we practicing it or learning about it or going about it the way that we should be?
Right.
And this book that I'm reading, this Enlightenment Trap, I highly recommend. Like I said, I'm listening to it because I got it on. I could get it on. I had some Audible credits, and I like to read at night while I'm sitting there. I like to listen and so this just listen to this description and tell me what this sounds familiar. In 2012, 38-year-old Ian Thorson's search for spiritual transcendence ended in tragedy on a remote Arizona mountaintop. His wife, a woman anointed as a goddess by an eccentric Buddhist community, held him in his arms as he slowly died from dehydration and dysentery. For Carney, a journalist and anthropologist who lived in India for 6 years, Thorson's death was just the most recent iteration of an unspoken epidemic that connected intensive meditation and mental instability. The Enlightenment Trap explores how Tibetan Buddhism in the West morphed from its roots in the Himalayan foothills into a fundamentally new American religion. And right now I'm talking about, so it says, for Thorson, the entry point into this new faith was Geisha Michael Roach, the supreme spiritual leader of Diamond Mountain University. So I'm on the part of the books where we're talking about Michael Roach and his childhood and how he got influenced by this. And I swear to God, I would put him on the same place as like a Tony Robbins person, because he was, talk about the ultimate seeker for something. That's Michael Roach. This guy, listening to them describe his childhood. He's spoken to the mother. Like, it's, so him and Ian Thorson are both like, if you had to pick out who the penultimate seeker was, these guys. So now this book is supposed to have everything. It's supposed to have like, you know, psychosis, mental instability. Apparently there's like forbidden love going on because the woman that he died with was like Michael Roach's ex-wife, who he was studying under. So there's like a hell of a lot of stuff going on there. But the book so far is fascinating. If nothing else, for nothing else, than this kind of history or research look into Eastern religion and how it's come to the United States and how it's and watching now how it's being ingested by Westerners and kind of like translated out to the masses. And it's really, really fascinating. So highly recommend, look up Scott Carney. He's got 4 books out. I guess I haven't done a search for seeing what he's written on, but it sounds like he's written plenty of articles on this as well. Yeah, so that's what sucked me in to that. Like, I mean, I heard the story in the first episode and I was like, what the hell is this podcast about? I got to listen to this because this is crazy. And it just kind of went down from there. But I think that his points about meditation and emotional instability is extraordinarily on point. I think that if anything, this podcast has shown that that's something that's a definite possibility when you go into this practice. I mean,
yes.
I wouldn't even know what to do for 10 hours to sit there in meditation. Honestly, I don't know if I could do that.
I mean, I could be quiet for 10 hours, but I don't know if I can meditate. Like,
I know where my mind would go and it would not be a happy place. Like, I know I would be starting to think about things in my life and I would just be like, I could understand while not having the right guide through that would be very destructive.
yes.
Very destructive. So there's our discussion of Astray, which we will reserve the right to come back to at any point in time.
At any point in time
when we think of something else. I'm sure as I read this book, I'm gonna. So while we're on the topic, I will put all of this in the description. All right, I will link to the podcast. I will link to Scott Carney. I will link to Sid Vici. There are TED Talks. Savici gives one that's like 13 minutes long, talks about her spiritual journey, very good to read. If you've listened to the podcast, we talked about this last week, her voice and her body, completely 2 different things.
She's adorable, though.
She's adorable. I had to find out what this woman looked like because her voice was like,
I thought she was beautiful. I thought they matched. Tell
if it was driving me insane or if I loved it. I'm still kind of like, I don't know. And then Scott Carney does a really fascinating TED Talk where he talks just about this, which is great. I will link that. I will link. There's a really good Forbes article about the podcast, plus a couple of others that I can link to that you. So I, again, highly recommend looking into this. I think it's something that, if anything, you'll be entertained, but I think you'll be more fascinated and then just intrigued, and you'll learn a lot, but you'll also have lots of questions and want to find more. I want
edge of your seat. You'll be at the edge of your seat. You'll be like, oh, I'm on episode 7 already. Like, I thought I was on episode 5. I told you I was on episode 5. I was on episode 7. I was so mad. I was like,
my only complaint is it's too short. I think we need another episode or 2. I mean,
another 9.
Yeah, another 9. I mean, there's content for days there. There really is. There really is.
This is a really, really, really good.
It's fascinating.
Well put together, well cared about podcast.
Nothing I would ever think of. Never even in my life would I have thought of this.
All I have to say is I don't know. Well, I know how. But now I'm watching Bigfoot documentaries. I'm watching
it's my
prospecting videos. I'm just cryptids. Like, seriously, I know the word cryptid. Right. I blame you.
Okay. So Wednesday, we are going to be joined by Dr. War Maiden, and we're going to be talking about the L will be for lingering. And we will talk about chronic illness, which will be very interesting. I can't wait. That will be an excellent conversation. I'm sure Dr. War Maiden is the person who owns the other half of my brain. So it should be great. We will be doing an L is for Lost, and we will talk about David Paulides. I promise. And I probably do that on Monday. But on Wednesday, I will give you the homework if you wanted to read up on this. I don't want to get into Bigfoot. But I know that the whole thing is David Paulides started out as a Bigfoot person, Bigfoot lake searcher, and then kind of in that this is how it transformed into a much bigger problem that is actually real. So we'll talk about that. So having said that,
make me lose friends and everything.
Yeah, I know. Thank you to everybody who's in the chat. Appreciate you listening, watching. Thank you for everybody lurking. Again, go find the podcast. Go listen to it. Astray.
Please go watch.
Platforms.
Go listen to the podcast.
Always open to talking about it. Thank you to our mod, man called Scott. Thank you for the mod. Thank you, Toasty, Big Boss, Coffin Queen, everybody who's lurking. Thank you so much for showing up and listening to us. We appreciate all of you and your viewership. If you are not subscribed to us on YouTube, you can fix that right away by going to I'll Take the L and hitting that subscribe and like button. If you are not following us on Twitch, you should fix that. Excuse me.
Bless you.
I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Pardon me. You should fix that right away and follow us. And we'd like to thank everybody who supports the podcast. We have a number of folks who stream on Twitch listed on our page that also are good friends of the show, support us. If you're looking for other kind of content, go check them out. Some great DJs, some good gaming streams, some good talking. I'm going to plug my husband who streams on Warframe and I guess Fortnite now, which is his new thing. Him and Toasty seem to be doing a lot of streaming, and it seems to be very entertaining. So go check that out. Big shout out to Danny P, who's a DJ on here who does his streams. Usually, I think Monday nights he's off. He might throw a pop up every now and again. I'm going to plug Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, 80s night, best night of the week. Best party you'll have without going to a club. If you can't go anywhere, come on to Twitch and have fun with us. Best night of the week. Wednesday nights, best night. Angie, thank you again, as always, for entertaining my crazy thoughts and whims. And I'm so glad that you loved the podcast and that we get to talk about it. I never get to talk about any of this stuff with anybody. I can never get anybody to listen to any of the podcasts.
I guess that makes me crazy too, huh?
No, it's just, I think people get overloaded. Like podcasts are the one thing I really do listen to a lot of. I listen to a lot of them at night. Yes. Mommy. Well, I showed everybody the picture, Ava. Everybody saw it. Again, Ava would like everyone to know she drew me this picture.
Okay. There she is.
So yeah, get out of here.
This is not your platform. This is not your platform.
Someplace else. No kids allowed. So thank you, Angie. I look forward to our conversation on Wednesday with Colleen. It's a good time. I look forward to having further conversations on this because I'm sure you and I are going to think about more stuff as this goes by, and I can't wait. And we'll talk about cryptids too at some point, I promise.
I love Bigfoot. I'm going to make a Bigfoot shirt. I'm going to order a Bigfoot
I'm going to make a Bigfoot background for us when we have it done. Okay. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you again. Hopefully tune in Wednesday for Chronic Illness. A good time. We try to make everything
Chronic Illness. We're going to have a good time.
We're going to have a good time. We're going to have a good It's a good time. It's a good time. You got to laugh at this point because if you don't, you're going to start crying. Have a good night, everybody.
I'll sick Bigfoot on you.